because here on the podcast, I like to choose, I look through, photographers' portfolios, and I try to choose images that I'm really interested in finding out the backstory about, but also kind of hopefully represent some of your best work. And I think this image that I chose from your Florida project, kind of for me, it kind of represents a lot of the style of your photography, because I think there's a poetry I find in a lot of your images. You're not just documenting things in a very straightforward way. There's a lot of artistry and poetry in many of your images, and I think that really helps draw people in when they're looking at your work, because it's not just straight documenting what's happening. It's kind of touching upon people's kind of sensibilities of art as well when they look at your photos. So this image, I was wondering if you could tell us how do you go about capturing this, because there must be so much you're thinking about in those situations where you're thinking about your safety, you're thinking about all the equipment, but you're also trying to capture powerful images that tell a story about what you're photographing. I was wondering how do you balance that?
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I think sometimes like someone trained as a scientist, like you have to turn off that almost science part of your brain
Mm,
because you are trying to think about how to document science or document these places in a way that's beautiful and way that people are going to connect with them. It's not like the scientific method. Not that there's no room for creativity in the scientific method. I think there's a lot, but um it's just a different way of kind of going about the process. And you hit the nail on the head. I mean, a lot of being in this place to take this image takes a lot of training that's outside of photography. So this is actually an image that I did on breath hold. And a lot of my work is scuba diving and a lot is breath hold. And I think you're in a little bit of a different headspace when you're doing the two different things, because obviously with scuba
mm,
you can be breathing underwater, and breath hold you have a limited time to be able to compose the image while you're not breathing. And this one is a place that I'd actually photographed a bunch of times. I find that a lot of my images, I like to return to the same places over time. This spot in Jenny Springs, it's along the Santa Fe River. This is kind of a less if you swim over this crack and look down into it, it's just very dark. It just looks like a crack into the middle of the earth in this really crystal clear
wow.
water. But when you dive down and look up, I've taken a lot of these pictures over the years because I just love how it's almost like an eye and it frames the person. And the water is so clear that it does look
Exactly.
like they're flying. And I still will never get over every time I go to a spring. I've been to the springs hundreds, I don't know if thousands is the right word. I lived there for 10 years and went multiple times a week and for research and for photography. And I just will never get over how clear it is. I don't care how much you swim in every ocean on the planet. You will never feel the way it feels to swim in this water. And so on this one, I was breath holding. Like I said, I dove down. There are things that I would do different now. I think um, the way I have the strobes, I feel like it's lighting up the rock a little bit weird. Because you have to balance, right, that like complete darkness down below. Sometimes I wouldn't use strobes when I'm free diving. I guess I was using them
Mm,
here. But like it's so bright above, right, where she's swimming, that you have to not overexpose that part of it. So those are kind of some of the things I'm thinking of. Also, it's very thin in this particular crack. So when you dive down,
mhm.
you have a almost 10-inch glass dome on the front of your camera that you're trying not to scratch. So that's always in my head
Okay.
because because that's expensive to get a new one or to fix if you scratch that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things going through your mind, and framing that in the middle was in getting her body position right too, because you can't obviously communicate with someone when you're underwater. So if you say swim over the top of this spring while I take a picture, you still don't know what they're going to look like. And she was thankfully kind of a natural in the water and looked like she was enjoying herself and not flailing at the surface, which is common when you're photographing people in the water because it's hard to look elegant.
Wow, it's amazing just listening to you explaining that whole process. I mean, it is literally a different world to say how I photograph. I encourage people, so my students, to just go out with one camera body, 135 mm lens, and just go and shoot.
Yeah,
But
right. It's a little bit of preparation, but it's once you're in there, I think the really beautiful part of it is like you said, like that's all you're thinking about. Like you're in the water holding your breath, and the one thing that you're trying to do is frame the shot so that it's right, and you can't hear anything. It's
Mhm.
dark until you look back up. It's just it is a different world, and I feel more creative there. And I feel like all the other distractions of the world are kind of closed out. Your phone's not going to ding. You're not going to get a call. You're not going to all of a sudden feel like you have to do something else or be somewhere else. That's where you are, and you're very much in the moment, which I think contributes to taking an image that is powerful.
And do you enjoy that? Do you enjoy that? There must be a lot of pressure, I suppose, especially with the diving where you are having to hold your breath because you literally have a finite amount of time where you can be down there. But even with the scuba diving in general, I guess there's also a finite amount of time that you can be down there to have an opportunity to get the shot. Do you like that pressure? Does
I
that
do.
help
I
in your
mean,
process?
I think it does. I mean, I think it adds a little bit more like pressure when you're actually on an assignment. And I think one of the really beautiful things about being able to work in the Springs for so many years was when I was learning, I wasn't shooting the images for anybody. I was shooting them for myself, and I was
Mm.
trying to develop my eye and learn photography. And it didn't matter. There wasn't as much pressure. Of course, you put the pressure on yourself, as we know as photographers, is sometimes the worst critical eye is yourself. But I think like allowing myself the space and time to develop as a photographer without someone, I mean, it was helpful to have feedback from the images, but it's not like, oh, you come back from a Nat Geo assignment and have no photos and now you're never going to get an assignment again. I think now, yeah, there is a little bit more pressure
Hmm.
if you're working on an actual story, but I do enjoy that in a lot of ways. I think I don't feel stressed underwater, and that helps to put me in the right headspace. I think above water, I just feel like I'm a more stressed person. Something about the water and the weightlessness and the kind of the magic of all of it. It's everything is different down there. Like above water, you're not even in the same body position. Like you try to swim like a fish like this when you dive. And like, since when are you crawling around on, you're not going around the world like this in a horizontal fish position.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Literally a different world.
Yeah, and I think like you can just get so many different angles and of course you do an amazing job of it above water, but I just think personally for me, like being in the water is just a different headspace.
I just want to go back to something that you mentioned before about, at the beginning you were taking pictures for yourself. And I think that's really important for, young photographers, aspiring photographers, amateur photographers, is that sometimes it is super important just to go out and take pictures for yourself, but also, work on stories that you care about, that you feel passionate about, even if no one's given you an assignment yet or given you money to go and do it. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about, you know, how you pick your stories, because I suppose as freelance photographers, we're not always waiting for someone to give us our dream assignment or dream story. You've got to go out there and get it, and I think that comes from finding stories that you personally care about. I was wondering how you approach that, how you find those stories that you really care about.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, a lot of the first stories that I did were in the Springs and about the Springs, and I was out there for research anyways. And then as I got farther along in grad school and doing the research, I realized how difficult it was to do science and photojournalism at the same time.
Hmm.
So I would have to pick what I was doing on any given day because you're never going to do both well at the same time on the same dive. Um, and so at first, it just started out writing about those experiences. I wrote a blog. I started, you know, taking pictures, like created a website, had an online presence. And
Hmm.
then after I graduated, I feel like something that doesn't happen anymore. In 2018, I had two back-to-back assignments from the Nature Conservancy to go out and do ocean stories in Florida, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. But it was also still in Florida, though. One was in Mexico and the Yucatan, so very close by. But I think it speaks, like you're saying, to just going out where you are, where you live, in your backyard. Those
Hmm.
springs are 30 minutes from my back door. I would just go and spend as much time as I could there. And then as I started to want to develop stories about it, it was not just like springs as a topic, right? Not a story. So I started connecting with other researchers and saying, hey, like, you're going out in the field next week to monitor the turtle populations. Can I come with you? So I would start tagging along with them to document
Hmm.
their turtle field work. And that was one of my first stories about the springs, was about this using the turtles to tell the story of the declining springs because the turtles eat the vegetation. So
Okay.
for me, yeah, so for me, it's a lot of reading scientific papers, connecting with scientists at conferences, or just scientists that I'm working with, or other grad students. I went out with other grad students sometimes. And now it's still reading papers and understanding, doing a lot of research beforehand to understand, like if you're trying to document, a certain phenomenon, then you're going to have to go out at a certain time of year, at a certain, time of day. If you're on a research expedition, when is it happening? Is there a hurricane chasing you? Those kinds of things.
Sure.
So yeah, a lot of it is like the upfront preparation, but in terms of coming up with actual story ideas, so much of my things are science and conservation based. So if I am writing a story, writing a grant, sorry, for something,
Mhm.
it's also has to be something that can happen, a year in the future, because you don't get a grant the next week. You get a grant a couple of weeks or a couple of months or whatever later. So it has to be a story I don't think that I necessarily do really news photography. It's more like
Mm.
you do, like long form environmental, like long-term stories that can be documented potentially over time, but not that need to be documented tomorrow. And it's very different.
But it's interesting that you started close to home, where you lived and you were studying, and you found something local. I always try to tell people, you don't have to, if you want this kind of career, you don't immediately have to go and fly halfway around the world. You can
No.
look around where you live, look
Yeah.
into your personal interests, and find things that are, you know, we humans, we like easy, convenient things. And,
Right.
if something has easy access, you're much more likely to, excuse me, you're much more likely to go and work on it at the weekend when you have free time, and just pursue it if it's, convenient and close to you.
Yeah, I mean, the number of classes I went to in grad school with like a straight up like line from my mask on my face from being in the water from like 7 to 9 a.m. and then going straight to class is just like a lot. I mean, that's the amount of time that you really do have to spend to get in those hours to like get images that you're happy with and really, fine tune your skills. I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast, right? Is it doesn't matter the camera. Like I started out with these little like crop sensor cameras in whatever housing. I would buy them used on Wet Pixel, and then go in, and it matters like the camera you have in your hand, that you know how to use it. And so especially in underwater housing, you're not pressing the actual buttons, you're pressing a button that presses that button, and just knowing like how to operate that underwater when the fish or the turtle or the manatee comes up, you have to get the shot in that moment. You better like know which dials to turn and which buttons to push, or you're going to miss the shot. And if whether that's a $10,000 camera or a couple $100 camera, it really doesn't matter as long as you know how to use it.